I'm here today with Crystal Marroquin. Crystal is a doctorate in marriage and family therapy from Florida State University. She's now at University of Texas Southwestern in Dallas, Texas, where she kind of specializes in medical family therapy. Crystal, tell us a little bit about yourself, your clinical journey, and today we're talking about specifically you who and your interest in Virginia Satir's work and that as a clinical model. So tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you stumbled onto Satir, or how you found Virginia Satir.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I am from Puerto Rico and I moved to sort of central Texas when I was pretty young and I grew up kind of outside tiny town outside Austin. And so I did my undergrad and my master's at Texas Tech University. And, when I was looking for master's programs, I like knew I wanted to see clients and do clinical work, but I knew there were so many routes. And so I did, a bunch of different or I applied for a lot of different programs and like clinical psych and MFT and social work just to see, which one was gonna fit best for me. And I really loved when I interviewed for my MFT program. I feel like it really fit for me. It really aligned with who I am, and it felt very in line with kind of the collectivist background that I grew up with. And I just really loved that I was going to have the opportunity to just engage more people in these systems. And so that really fit for me. So I did my master's at Texas Tech, and then I continued on and just did my PhD at FSU. And in terms of how I kind of got connected with Satir, so in my master's program, I remember, I mean, having a hard time figuring out like which model was gonna work for me. And I had a supervisor that was really into feminist family therapy, and she connected me with feminist family therapy, and I was really getting into that, and I wanted to sort of integrate it with another model. And she was kind of like, you sort of naturally do some of these experiential things. And so she sort of kind of pointed me in the direction of Satir and was like, why don't you, read into this? And I feel like I really aligned with the theory of change and sort of that, the idea that change happens through that increase self-awareness and increase in self-esteem and sort of that belief that everyone has the resources they need to make the changes they want, but needs some extra support and sort of like releasing some of those blocked resources. And so that really, yeah, really aligned with me. And so I also really love that the model acknowledges the therapist personhood, and it sort of like encourages you to, bring your sense of humor into the room and really kind of shows you how to like model for the client. And I think initially I had a hard time with the like use of self. Like we learn a lot about that throughout this whole process. And I was kind of like, well, what does that mean? Like what does that look like? And how do you do it in a way that isn't like oversharing or imposing um into your client's time. And so I really love how this model sort of, gives you the chance to reflect your own, somatic responses to help model for the client like what that could look like and how they can do that in the therapy room. So I thought all of that, was just very special to me. And I really, yeah, I found a lot of value in it. And I feel like it really aligned with who I was, and I got to like grow in it and figure out what congruence looked like for me. And yeah, I thought it was great.
Yeah, in when I read Satir's work and I read Carl Whitaker's work, I mean, they both really dialed into that somatic response. Like what is going on for the client, what is going on for me right now as I'm sitting here with them. And in some ways, I think they were kind of ahead of their time when I read about interpersonal neurobiology. Like I think interpersonal neurobiology has introduced us to a new language about mirror neurons and things like that, like the way our brains connect with other people's brains and stuff like that. So, love how Virginia Satir, Carl Whitaker talk about that experiential format, that the feelings that I have as a therapist, as the therapist in the room, are equally important as to the feelings that my clients are having. Um, how do you feel like this model fit for you as someone who identifies, you're with your Puerto Rican background and your kind of Latina background? How do you like how did it fit with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it really came with the congruence piece. And honestly, I think it sort of stemmed from a lot of my upbringing and the aspects that I've learned of my culture being sort of the opposite. There being maybe some incongruence
Mm,
among, you know, I don't know, people who share a background. Well, I think because of within Hispanic culture, there is a large stigma surrounding mental health. And so I think I really connected with that piece of this is how you can help people, articulate what they're feeling, what their, physical processes going on, with their emotional processes. And I really loved that because I think I didn't really know, I mean, I didn't really know how to do that in a way that felt, congruent for me. And so I thought it was really yeah, fitting. And I think it works well for a lot of individuals from different, cultural backgrounds who maybe need to take those baby steps into learning how to talk about feelings and how to really reflect on your, inner processes that are going on. And I think it does that in a really cool way. I think the interventions are very tailored to give you like kind of micro skills to be able to slowly build upon that
mhm.
yeah, that vocabulary and that but also use like your own strengths to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, you talk about those interventions. I'd love to hear, Crystal, your experience of an intervention, and without divulging any client confidences, talk a little bit about an intervention that's typical to this model, how you've rolled it out. Maybe give an example, how it landed on people, how did people respond to it, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I think a really kind of spicy one within this model that people kind of maybe leads people to gravitate away from the model is the use of touch. Because I think when you watch maybe early videos of Satir doing therapy, she's really, she's in there, she's with the clients, she's holding them, she's having clients hold on to her while she's talking to other clients, and I think that can really scare an early therapist away from this model. I think that maybe scared me a little bit initially, but I wanted to really understand like what, the purpose was for her and how it was really connective for her and her clients. And so I think, it has to be evolved. And I think I really have been able to understand through supervision and just learning about theory, how it can be evolved to better support clients. And I think a big misconception about working with this model is that you have to, use all the interventions to be an experiential therapist, or you have to touch your clients to
Mhm.
say that you use touch or used it in the way Satir would.
Mhm.
But I think there are so many facets to using touch that aren't even necessarily physically touching your client. A big part of, evolving this model, of course, is incorporating consent and making sure we're asking our clients before we, engage with them physically in any way, even if you're preparing to scope them or something, asking if you can put your hands on them or help them facilitate, part of an intervention. But I think, what touch can look like is when a client is processing something really hard, moving your chair closer to the client and saying, is it okay if I get a little bit closer? Like I want to be in here with this, with you in this moment, and I want to hear what you're saying, and I want to be present with you, and asking, if they're processing something really heavy and maybe crying a lot or having a big emotional reaction, asking if it's okay if you put your hand on their back, or if you can sit close to them or offer them a Kleenex and maybe sit on the couch next to them, and just offering some of that proximity and, letting them know that you are there with them. Because I think it is sometimes hard when, emotions like that get heavy in session and maybe you're sitting there and you're not really sure what to do early on um, in your work as a therapist, but I think you can comfort a client the way you would comfort maybe somebody else in your life, but of course with some structure and again asking for consent. And I think other ways to incorporate touch are really, facilitating touch as well. I've had clients that are, especially couples that are working on, connecting more in the ways that they need, but are just having trouble sort of picking up on each other's cues. And so, having one partner explain something, and maybe you have them face each other, like other models really highlight that, right? Facing each other, getting in there very close and making eye contact. And you can also encourage a partner to hold the hand of another partner, or while someone's processing something, say, can you put your arm around your partner and maybe scoot a little closer to them,
Mhm.
and sort of facilitating that opportunity and even processing that afterwards, right? Like after moving past the moment and doing what, the work that's needed in that moment, being like, what was that like for you? For you to have this, God, this overwhelming moment and your partner to be there for you in that
Yeah.
way, to get close to you, to comfort you, and give them a chance to really articulate to the other person what it meant for them. Maybe in their relationship they haven't really done that or didn't know how to do that. And so facilitating touch can be a really special part of it as well. And I think clients, what I've noticed is that, especially with couples, like facilitating touch for them and like highlighting that and processing it, that they start sort of naturally doing it in session, session after session, they start doing it on their own. And I think there's also value in highlighting that, right? We're trying to boost this self-esteem, this confidence in the changes you're making and highlighting. Like, I just noticed that you did that on your own. You went in there to comfort them. Like, what did it mean for, your partner to kind of instinctually do this without being prompted? And what did that mean for you? And so I think there's a lot of ways to, yeah, really emphasize touch in the therapy room and get even just like manipulating the space. If you're not even directly touching your clients, you're getting closer to them. You're, helping them be present if they're, having a hard time articulating something. You're getting in there close with them and you're being like, no, let's talk about this specific thing that we're trying to process, whatever that might look like. I feel like I gave kind of different examples. I don't know if it would be helpful for a more like
No, I mean
specific.
that's perfect. And Crystal, as you're talking, one of the things I'm thinking about is the number of healing modalities that there are. Psychotherapy being one of them. Family therapy, psychotherapy, talk therapy being one. But in
Mhm.
so many of these healing modalities, the touch is just a given, and we don't blink twice when we think about going to a chiropractor who's cracking our back or adjusting our spine and stuff like. I guess that's probably the more technical term, right? Adjusting our spine, cracking our back. We don't think about that. Of course, they're gonna touch you,
Mhm.
but we've moved away from that in this domain because of worries about triggering people, worries about people who have difficult backgrounds, abusive backgrounds, where touch was not a healing thing in their life. So I think even that modeling, like touch, can be healing. Touch
Mhm.
can be welcomed, and it can be the kind of thing that helps humanize another person.
Mhm.
And of course, I think in our most intimate relationships, we want touch to be a part of that. And so modeling some of that within appropriate bounds and things like that is really important. So I love how you're talking about it. I don't know if you have a particular case or a client that you want to talk about, and how touch was received, how they felt about it, or how they talked about it afterward, or how they came back to you and said, like that was an important part of my healing process. I don't know if you have anything like that. That would be fine, but you don't necessarily need to either.
Yeah, something that I mean that I thought about while you were talking, I think that trauma informed piece is huge, right?
Yeah,
And like recognizing if a client is coming in with something like that as their presenting problem, we have to be, extra mindful about the intervention, the way we're using the intervention, and of course asking for consent and letting the client know, I think from the jump when you're explaining, doing kind of your introductory spiel that this is kind of part of your approach, like what do they think about that? And really, from the beginning laying the groundwork that this could be something that is a part of your model and giving them the chance to be like, oh, maybe that doesn't really fit for me and we can respect that boundary.
yeah,
And so I think, in supervising, a lot of my supervisees have said, how do you do this with an individual, right? Like you can touch them, you can comfort them, and if what if they aren't okay with touch? And so I think there are other experiences I've had that I've been able to help a client even like facilitate their own like sort of self-touch and like offering themselves a hug in session, like when they're really overwhelmed or, taking a minute to hold the parts of their arms or their chest, like wherever they're feeling that tension. I think that's part of that somatic knowledge of like this big thing's coming up. Where are you feeling it? Like, where is the heaviness? Like, can you point me to the heaviness? Would anything soothe that heaviness right now? And helping the client sort of navigate that process as well to build those skills to use outside of therapy. When thinking of like a specific example that I think was really meaningful for me was I was working with a couple, I think it was like a few summers ago, and they had experienced there was infidelity in their relationship, and they were both, very on board to do couples therapy, and they were both very committed to therapy. But they were just having a hard time, making their way to having those kind of sort of casual touch again, even just like giving each other hugs and looking each other in the eye when they're sitting across the table. Like there was just a lot of avoidance of that because um, they weren't really sure how to approach it. And I think doing some of those introductory touches in therapy was really meaningful for them because it was in a space that, we were all familiar with each other and we had been working really hard on this thing. And so, during some sessions, I would have them sit sort of knee to knee and sort of let them talk through things. And I would sit, a little bit farther away from them and let them, process together. And initially I would prompt them, like what would it be like right now if, she was holding her hand like while you talked about this,
Yeah.
and before even touching, right? Like saying like what would it feel like? And
Yeah,
like,
just
oh,
the mindset of it, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was, a lot of nerves. Like, oh, I think I would, I'd feel a little bit nervous. I'd probably get like some butterflies. And I'm like, okay, well, do those butterflies feel like an indicator of like a good thing, like a warmth, like an excitement to potentially, have him holding your hand, or be holding hands? Or does it feel more like maybe a warning sign or uneasiness? Can we understand like the origins of the feeling and the meaning and like slowly getting into just having those small experiences I think was really helpful for them. And so they ended up, they were one of those couples that kind of started naturally comforting each other in those ways on their own. And I think they were able to like replicate that outside of therapy because they were able to slow down their process and be like, okay, something's happening for me. I'm having this somatic response, but it's not a bad thing, not anymore. And be able to
Mhm.
sort of reframe, that those experiences and make meaning of it in a way that felt, comfortable for them and their pace of like healing and repairing their relationship. So
Yeah, and of course you want as much as possible, especially working with couples, you want so much of what you do in the session to translate to what happens outside. And so I'm sure that if you're breaking the ice and getting them to even consider what it would be like to be holding hands, or if there was a hand on the back of the back of the shoulder or the small of the back, or like that just helps them envision what it might be like to be doing this at home in the privacy of our own home and things like that. So wonderful. Crystal, what would you say about somebody who is wondering whether Satir's work is a good fit for them, or this experiential therapy is good work? What would be the next step somebody would need to take to kind of really kind of take this on to see if they could kind of make this part of how they present clinically?
yeah, I mean, I think like a big part of it, and this sort of came for me when I started supervising, because then I was like, oh, wait, this is like a huge, part of this, obviously, but I think it's different when you're on the other side of things and helping someone navigate, getting into this model. But I think figuring out what congruence looks like for you as an individual, because this is such a huge part of the model. And I think a big skill within this model is recognizing incongruence in your clients that come in, right? And so I think figuring out doing that self of the therapist work because, the personhood and person of the therapist is so big within this model, understanding, yeah, what that looks like, how to talk about it, how to talk about when you are feeling incongruent and be able to kind of identify those parts of yourself. I think are a huge just like starting point in like just getting a grasp of what this model is and what it can be. And I think also, I mean, Satir as a human, we see that in like the master's tapes was very like adventurous and spontaneous. And I, wasn't afraid to kind of go for things. And I think these interventions being so kind of dynamic and having some of these more yeah, I don't know. I guess those spontaneous pieces, you kind of have to dive in. I think I was a little scared at first to do some of these interventions, like create a sculpt and initiate a sculpt with clients. And I think I did sort of that like kind of prepping the clients and being like, oh, we're about to do something. It might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but we're gonna do this. But I think you kind of have to like axe all of that and like throw it to the wind and like say, so next I think we're gonna get up and we're gonna and like stand up and just start getting into it and really like believe in it. I think that is kind of what makes these interventions so special is if you're don't have any doubts and you're kind of going for it, even though you might be really scared on the inside. But I think that's what kind of makes them work, that you're really, yeah, believing in them and being like, let's give it a go and let's see what happens.
Yeah, we see with the common factors research, right? Like one of the leading I guess one of the leading predictors of successful therapy is the therapist's belief in their model, not so much the model itself, right? But your belief. And it would take some kind of leadership on the therapist's part to be able to say, okay, we're going to clear the chairs out, we're going to stand up, and we're going to do this thing here. And if you've developed rapport with the couple, they will probably follow you into that and kind of take the lead. But if you're like, I don't know if I want to do this, or let's try this thing. I read about it once in grad school. Like, I think you have to kind of commit to it and dive in, right? It's kind of like you can go into a pool little by little and kind of acclimate, or you can just dive right in and get acclimated all at once. Maybe there's a little bit of that diving right in that needs to happen with this model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I had a really good experiential supervisor in my master's program, and he would have me do all kinds of interventions that felt so out of my comfort zone. And like I would go back behind the mirror and he was like, you might feel so scared and so anxious right now, but I need you to just take a deep breath, let it all out, and I need you to just go in there and sell it to them.
Just do
Sell it
it.
to them like you've never sold anything before, and just say like, yeah, like talk about it like we do it all the time. And then you can come back here and you can panic. But like he's like, you just have to go out there and do it. And I think, having that like kind of compassionate push
Yeah,
to really give those interventions a go, I think made me feel like, oh, I can, use this model. Like this model really can be for anyone, because you kind of make it your own.
love it. Love it. Crystal Marroquin, Dr. Crystal Marroquin, thank you so much for being with us today. Virginia Satir's work, I'm so glad it lives on in many MFTs today, and so glad to be able to find out how you've taken it on and incorporated it, and how it speaks to you as a person as well. So thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right.